living in a state without a state income tax. So, we find ways in a decentralized system to escape the worst of the tyranny. If you're somebody that cares about guns, you get out of California and you go to, Kentucky, where you can carry a gun open, concealed, whatever, whenever you want. If you want weed, you go to California. Don't go to Kentucky. So that's what I'm really about. It's about decentralization. So when I'm talking about this is because I'm trying to devolve power away from the centralized system to the states, because there are 50 of those, so we can deal with those a little easier. I would love to devolve power all the way back to the individual, right? Because that's where only legitimate power lies. But that's why we do what we do. That's why we do this strategy. So you're thinking, okay, Mike, this sounds good, but does it work? Absolutely it works. Refusal to cooperate works for one very key reason. Madison understood this even in the 1700s, when the federal government was conceived to be small. But today it's huge. And the dirty little secret is, it depends on state and local action to do almost everything that it does. You guys remember the fake government shutdown in 2013? I call it fake because they didn't shut down any of the good stuff. NSA was still running, IRS was still collecting taxes, but they did close Mount Rushmore. They closed outside. Thank you, federal government, for that. But during that fake government shutdown, there was a letter that was sent around from the Association of Governors. And they were talking about, oh, this is awful, and we need to get the federal government back open. And there's an interesting line in that letter where they said that the states work with the feds to accomplish most federal programs. So think about that a minute. If state and local governments are helping to facilitate most federal programs, what happens if the state and local governments say, you know what? We're not helping with this anymore. This is a team game between the feds and the states. What happens if half the team quits? Doesn't go too good for the team. And that's exactly what happens when states refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. And I can tell you exactly where it's worked most effectively, because people have been willing to push it forward. And that's with the legalization of marijuana at the state and local level. We have now, I think, 39 states that have medical marijuana, and 21 states that have legalized completely. Delaware just recently passed a bill to completely legalize marijuana. Now, the federal government says that we have complete prohibition of marijuana. They ain't enforcing it because they can't, because half the team has quit. And it's interesting, you go back to 1996 when California passed its medical marijuana law. They're out there by themselves, alone, hanging in the wind. And when they were debating this, they had 3 presidents, 2 former, 1 sitting, actually go and lobby against it, say you can't do this. California did it anyway. And it was rough at first because the feds were aggressively trying to enforce their marijuana prohibition. So they would go in and they would raid these medical marijuana dispensaries. And from what I understand, the people that cared about this issue were so devoted, they were so committed to making sure that this worked, that they would have those things open again in the following afternoon. That's the kind of human action that we need. It's not just that California passed the law, it's that there were a lot of people that were willing to put their butts on the line to make sure that marijuana was available for people medically. Now today, there's simply no way that the federal government can enforce marijuana prohibition. We actually ran the numbers, this was several years ago, actually right after Colorado legalized marijuana for recreational use. And the feds decided, we're going to show Colorado who's boss here. So they went in and they did this big raid in the Denver area. I think they hit like 12 medical marijuana dispensaries. And they shut them down, and arrested some people, and made a big deal about it, did the press releases. And as it turns out, there were like 400 marijuana dispensaries in Colorado alone. and the Fed shut down 12. And if you look at the numbers, the amount of money they spent to do those raids, to shut down those 12 medical marijuana dispensaries, it would take basically the entire DEA budget for a single year to shut down just the dispensaries in Denver, Colorado at the time, which was years ago. There's no way. The feds can't do it. That's the dirty little secret. And the reality is they can't do anything without the federal government, without the state and local cooperation. We can take this blueprint that we've seen work with marijuana, and we can apply it to guns. Because you know what? They can pass an assault rifle ban. If the states don't enforce it, it's not going to get enforced. We could have shut down Obamacare because it was the states that implemented it. You know who enforces all of the Obamacare mandates? It's the state insurance commissioners. If the state insurance commissioners said, we're not enforcing this crap, it wouldn't have gotten enforced because there's no enforcement mechanism at the federal level. Vaccine passports, those were being enforced through OSHA. Stop cooperating with the federal government. Go to 10thamendmentcenter.com, TENTH, it's all spelled out. If you go down halfway down the page, you'll see a place where you can download our State of the Nullification Movement report. Download that, it's a free PDF, and you can see how we apply this strategy to all kinds of issues, from surveillance to guns to healthcare to sound money. We have the Defend the Guard bill, which is an incredible piece of legislation that would require governors to refuse to commit National Guard troops to combat in foreign areas unless there's an actual declaration of war or one of the 3 constitutional criteria are met. It actually passed the Arizona Senate this year. It's building momentum every year. So there's all kinds of ways that we can apply this. Refusal to cooperate with officers of the union. Doesn't require guns, doesn't require anything but saying no. It's so easy, a 3-year-old can do it. 3-year-olds are good at saying no. I remember mine when they were 3. So that's really what we're about at the 10th Amendment Center. Refusal to cooperate with officers of the union. It's a fantastic path forward. It doesn't fix everything, but it's something that you can do at the state level. And no matter what state you're in, you can find things that states are willing to push back against, from California to Alabama. One of my favorite things, actually, was right here in the great state of Texas. Back in, I don't remember what year it was. It was the mid-teens. It was when they brought out the TSA body scanners. Remember the naked body scanners? So they brought those out, and then they were getting really aggressive with the gropes. And there was actually a bill that was introduced in the Texas legislature. I think it was Simpson, if I'm not mistaken, who introduced the bill. Basically, it would have treated TSA agents who touch you inappropriately, which they do all of the time, would have treated it as a sexual assault. And this bill actually passed the Texas House. And it was going to the Texas Senate. And they were going to pass it too. And then in came the feds. And they sent this letter to all of the senators that if you do this, we're going to shut down all of the airports in Texas. And they backed off. Wusses. That's why I hate politicians. But here's the thing. Let's be realistic about this. Do you really think that the federal government was going to come into Texas and shut down all of the airports, considering that at the time you had a hub for Southwest, you had a hub for Continental, you had a hub for American Airlines? It would have shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. Were they really going to do that and then go to the American people and say, well, we've got to do this because we've got to have the right to touch your boob? No. Politicians are political. They know when they can go too far, but they always come up with these scare tactics to scare us. Don't be scared. Now, I want to touch on the legal issue of this to close out, because a lot of people will say, well, Mike, this sounds great, but the federal government's not going to let you do that. You can't refuse to cooperate. Supremacy clause, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're wrong. Now, generally speaking, I don't care 2 cents about what the Supreme Court says. As far as I'm concerned, they're a bunch of overpaid government-employed lawyers. One of my friends calls them judicial temple monkeys, which I think is kind of funny. But the Supreme Court has given us a gift, and it's called the anti-commandeering doctrine. And it is a legal principle that actually dates all the way back to 1842. And in a nutshell, this legal principle says the federal government cannot force states to use their personnel or resources to enforce the federal law or implement a federal program. Let me say that again. The federal government cannot force states to use their personnel or resources to implement a federal program or enforce a federal law. So in a legal system, in a legal sense, Texas can't say, well, we're going to arrest ATF agents if they try to enforce federal gun control. That's not going to work. But Texas could certainly say, we're not going to use our law enforcement resources to enforce gun control in this state. And people always say, well, it just won't work. You can't do it. What do you think sanctuary cities are? It's exactly what I'm talking about. Sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, all they've done is say, we're not going to use our personnel or resources to enforce immigration laws. That's all it is. And Trump, we're going to defund them or we're going to shut them. They couldn't do it. You notice it never got done because they couldn't do it because of this anti-commandeering doctrine. So we have this tool in our toolkit that we can use, and even the damn Supreme Court agrees. So yay us. Let's use that power, right? To use that legal principle to push this forward. Stop using state and local resources to do stuff for the feds. And when that happens, stuff for the feds is going to stop getting done. Just like it has with marijuana. So that's what we do at the 10th Amendment Center. You can check that out. Like I said, download that PDF if you want to know more about the strategy and more about this legal principle and all of these different things. It's all right there for you. But I want to close out just on a more kind of a personal level, because like I said, I've alluded to this already. This idea, we call this nullification, by the way, which is kind of a legal term, and if you say it, people immediately think you're a racist. So I don't use it very much because I got tired of being called a racist about 10 years ago, so try to avoid that. But this whole principle ultimately comes down to individual human action, right? Like the federal government can do stuff and the states can do stuff. Politicians can do stuff, but if people don't take action, nothing's actually going to get done. Marijuana legalization, again, has happened because people want to smoke weed. That's just all there is to it. I wish the people who wanted their guns had the same guts as the weed people. Gun people drive me crazy. This is a side note. I'm about to tangent. But it drives me crazy. I get in these gun groups because we do a lot of work in the Second Amendment realm, trying to stop enforcement of federal gun control. And all these people do is defer to cops. It's like, stop. It drives me crazy. Weed people never said, well, I need permission to have my weed before I'm going to get my weed. No, nobody that had marijuana back in the 90s said that. All these people, I can't carry my gun because the government said I can't, so I'm going to give it back to the cops. Okay, into the tangent. Back to individual human action. This is what's key and what's important. So I'm going to close out with this story. And you're all familiar with this story. You've all heard this. It's a historical event. And that's Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. We all know the story. But I don't think most people really realize a lot of the nuances of this story that, to me, make it even more amazing than it actually was, or than it's actually perceived oftentimes. First off, most people have the impression that the way it worked is that, like, there was a section in the back of the bus for black people and the white people got in front of the bus, and that one day Rosa Parks got in and she sat down in the white part of the bus and she refused to get up and blah, blah, blah. It's not really how it worked. The way it worked was they had these little bitty signs that they would hang on the bus seats. And it basically said something to the effect of whites only in front of this sign, or I can't remember the verbiage, but basically the sign indicated that black people on the bus had to sit behind where the little sign was. So this sign would move depending on how full the bus was. So that day, Rosa Parks gets on the bus. It's a rainy day. She actually sits where she's supposed to sit, okay? But it's raining and it's busy, so the bus starts to fill up, and they get to a certain stop, and the bus driver gets up. He gets that little sign, and he moves it about 3 rows back behind where Rosa was sitting. There were actually 3 other black people that were sitting in that section. The other 3 immediately got up, moved back behind the sign. And Rosa simply just refused to get out. She just sat there. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, you know, Rosa Parks was a political activist and she's commie and we hate her because of blah, blah. No, that's true. She was a political activist. It is true that they had talked about resisting. But it's not like she got up that morning and said, you know what, I think I'm going to screw with the bus driver today. She was just trying to go home from work. So they moved a sign. Bus driver comes up to her and says, you need to get up. This is how she put it in her words in her autobiography. She said, when he saw me still sitting, he asked if I was going to stand up. And I said, no, I am not. And he said, well, if you don't stand up, I'm going to have to call the police and have you arrested. And I said, you may do that. I love the way that she approached that. Think about that. Think about what she didn't do, right? She didn't punch the bus driver in the face. She didn't fight the cops. She didn't burn down the bus. She didn't burn down her neighborhood. She just said, no, I'm not going to do that. She resisted by refusing to comply. And it did cost her. She did go to jail. And she was fined $10, $4 in court costs. Keep in mind, this is in like the 50s, so inflation. She also lost her job. She was the seamstress at a local department store. They didn't want the publicity, so she got fired. So she sacrificed for taking that stand. And this is what she said later. She said, people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired. But that isn't true. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. And she said, I was not old, although some people have an image of me as being old. I was only 42. Now that I'm 56, that doesn't seem very old. This is what she said. I wasn't tired. She said, no, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Tired of giving in. That's why I do what I do. I got tired of giving in. I got tired of just sitting back and watching this stupid political circus every 4 years and thinking if I go vote for the right president, everything will be fine. It's not fixing anything. It's not resistance. We've got to do something. This is something that we can do. It's practicable. It's practicable? No, it's practical. It's actionable. And it's being done now. And it's something that the LP Mises Caucus has been involved in. I know that the caucus has been very involved in the legalization of psychedelics, which is just the next logical step forward from weed. So this is something that you guys can put your efforts and energy to at the state and local level. But don't give in. And you know, in some ways I know I'm preaching to the choir. I'm saying this more than anything to give you some confidence, to give you some energy, to let you know that your human action matters. Think about what Rosa Parks did. Activist, not an activist, whatever. Her refusal to give up her seat that day lit a fire that ultimately burned up Jim Crow. She brought about real change. Everybody was act like the federal government did some great thing when they passed the civil rights laws. That's not what fixed all of that. What fixed it was people like Rosa Parks, people who refused to live under that kind of oppression and tyranny. It was human action. That's what this is about. So, as you go forth from here, I encourage you to take your own human action in whatever way you can. Count the cost. Figure out what hills you're not willing to die on. Willing to die on? COVID brain, man. But that's all I really want to do is encourage you to continue to take action. I really thank you guys so much for being here, taking a Saturday to hang out and listen to a bunch of people talk. Thank you for the opportunity of being here. And I'm going to close it out. I do have books again. I'm going to be at a table outside if anybody wants to come by, $20. I'm probably not going to hang around all day because I've about used up my allotment of energy for the rest of the day, but I will be around for a little bit, probably through lunch. So again, thank you guys so much.
and thank you for doing 3 legs of this tour with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I think that puts us right back here in this room to see Josie, the redheaded libertarian, at 11:30. Don't miss it.
No, I think most of the